All right, y'all. Welcome to lecture 2 of Intro to iOS Development. I'm Elvis, if you don't already know me. And today we're going to be learning about UIKit and Autolayout. So this is basically going to be like the stepping stones for how we actually get into iOS development. So today we're actually going to be like working with like buttons, labels, text views, all that cool stuff. So yeah, let's get right into it. Okay. So some logistics first. So please check that you're enrolled into our CMS. We've been hearing from some people that they're not enrolled, and that's really unfortunate because we have our first project due today. Um, so please come up to us if you're not enrolled. We'll add you. It takes like 2 seconds. Just got to give us your net ID and stuff, and we'll also make sure to enroll you into our ed. If you're not already in it, please make sure to enroll. Or please make sure, yeah, it's enroll in our ed. We have a lot of great questions being asked, and a lot of TAs are answering them, so it's a great resource. Speaking of resources, we have our slides and then the lecture recording, which will be put onto the website by the end of lecture. And yeah, also, if you're having any issues with Project One or just want help, I'll stay after a bit. Maybe Justin as well if he wants to.
Yeah, and another announcement for the video
Oh
as
my
well.
God.
Our free cookies. So I'll give you like three for the top three Kahoot winners. So y'all pay attention today. But
Great cookies. They're papers that have the potential to be cookies.
oh
So
yeah, these are fun. You can redeem them and sell them.
yeah, they're great. Yeah. I didn't come up with this idea. This is his. So yeah. But yeah, it's kind of reiterate, like I said, if you guys have any questions on P1, feel free to come up after lecture. Or just any questions, like feel free to come up to me after lecture. So our grading policy, just a reminder, we have like 3 slip days total. And the reason we have only 3 is because we also have a project drop in case you can't finish one of the projects. And yeah, if it's so the latest submission is on Wednesday, so we don't accept any submissions after Wednesday, and that's only because all of our projects come like one after the other. So we want to make sure you guys don't fall behind. But if you don't end up using slip days, it's about like 15% off per project if you don't use a slip day, which is like roughly like 1 point something points. So it's not a terrible amount, but please just try getting your assignments in on time. And if you have any questions, like feel free to come to us, ask on Ed, or go to the grading and projects frequently asked questions on the website. And we also have our mentorship program starting again this semester. So what we did last semester is we basically matched students up to a mentor on our sub team or to somebody who's taken the course before. And the idea of the program is to kind of have you have somebody to reach out to if you have any questions about like how do I implement a button, how do I implement text view. It's just a way for you to kind of have that like more personal interaction with the people on our course or in our course. And yeah, it could be as mentorshipy as you want. You can meet up as often as you want, as little as you want, like up to you. But yeah, if you're interested, please fill out our interest form. Yeah. No, you don't have to. Like if you don't want to, you don't have to, trust. But it's a nice thing to do. And yeah. I'll be putting these slides up later anyways, by the way. So like if you didn't scan the QR code, it's fine. Um, but yeah. So oops. Okay. Let's get into UIKit. So what is UIKit? So the definition of UIKit is a framework made by Apple to provide objects that we use to build iOS apps. And we want to focus on framework and core objects a bit. So what does that really mean? So UIKit is basically this library that makes our lives easier as iOS developers. So instead of having to like create a whole new button or like create a whole new like UI image view, these things come like already kind of pre-made. So we're given like a button, we could have a button and we could just like set the title of that button, set the text of that button basically. And that's all we have to do is create a button. We don't have to like set the borders or set like the height of the button. I mean, we do have to set the height of the button, but we don't have to like, there are a lot of like background things that go on with setting up these kind of views, like buttons that we don't have to do because of this library. So this library gives us buttons, UI labels, UI text views, UI image views, and a lot of other like cool sub views that we use to build these apps. And going into UIKit a bit more, we have a view controller and a view. So basically every screen that you've ever seen on an iPhone is controlled by some view controller. And this view controller itself isn't like a view really, like you don't really see it, but you see what it does. So every view like controls like how things are formatted on the screen, where things are, where buttons are, where text things are. And those things that are presented on the screen that you could actually see, those are views. So views could include anything like UI image views, UI buttons, UI labels, UI text fields. I'll be saying these four things a lot today in lecture, so I hope you all aren't annoyed. But yeah, these are all the things that come with UIKit as well, and they're all subclassed by UI view. And what that subclass means is that all these objects, UI image view, UI button, UI labels, they all come with cool properties that are shared amongst all of them. So like, say for example, you want to give like a radius to your button. You don't want it to be a square. Squares look boring, so you want to give it a radius. The way you would do that is you would do like UI button dot like layer dot corner radius is equal to like some number, say 5. Um, I've been like doing iOS a lot, so I memorize like the dot layer dot corner radius. We don't expect you guys to. You'll see it like when we do demo next Wednesday. But basically, like that corner radius property is shared amongst all of these objects because they're all subclass of UI view. So to summarize, it just makes our lives easier that they're subclass. And yeah. So let's go talk about view controllers a bit more. So this is my Spotify. We share any music tastes, that's cool. But there are two different view controllers, right? So we have the home page, which is like, we have the text, good afternoon. We have some cells up there, like a green cell, indigo cell, which is playlists. We have like these images of like Tyler and Steve. Love both of them. And yeah, we just have a lot of cool things happening on here. And everything on here is basically like a type of view. We have like a UI image view. We have UI text view like here. And yeah, there's a lot going on here, but these are all basically like views within views. And same thing with the library view controller. Um, our naming convention also follows something like this, where it's like blank view controller. So we would probably name this homepage something like home view controller and the library page like library view controller. Yeah. Any questions? We good? Cool. So those are view controllers. Like I said, they just control, like the name suggests, what's on the screen. But views are what you guys actually see on the screen. So this is our app, one of the app devs apps, Uplift. It's not currently being worked on, so don't yell at me if there are bugs on it. But we have stuff like UI labels, UI image views, UI buttons, and UI text views. And basically, this is what they are on the screen. So the UI label is just like a title, usually. UI image view, it's a little hard to see, but it's that backdrop image view that has, I think, a dancer, somewhere like that. And then we have the UI button, which is just add to calendar. Cool little button. And then the text view here at the bottom that has the description of the app or of the bar express. Yeah, I don't know what that is, but yeah. So let's go into depth with these objects a bit more. So first, we'll look at the UI label. So the UI label comes with all these cool properties. So you have like the text property, the font property, text color, and text alignment property. These aren't all the properties that I list aren't going to be all of the properties in the world that exist for UI labels. They're just probably like the ones that you're going to be working on or working with the most. So for example, when we create a UI label, we just say something like let my UI label is equal to UI label. And then to access the text property and change it, all we got to do is say my UI label.text is equal to some string. In this case, it would be bar express. And this is how we set the text to a UI label. Yeah. Aside from UI labels, we also have UI text views. And if you couldn't tell, they're virtually like identical. They share a lot of the same properties with the text, with the font, the text color, text alignment. But one of the things that's cool about UI text views is that there's this field is editable. So what that field basically tells us is whether or not the user could change the text which is in the text view. And the way we would access that is we would do something like my text view. In this case, we create a text view called my text view, which is equal to UI text view. And we access like properties like font is editable text alignment by doing like my text view dot some property. And if we were to change the is editable property, we would say something like my text view dot is editable is equal to false or is equal to true. I guess a question for you guys. What should we set the edit is editable field for this kind of text view? If it's like a description of, I guess, Bar Express, like, would it be true or would it be false? It'd be false, right? Because we don't want people changing our text view. That'd be that'd be weird, right? So instead, we have it to be ineditable. And what's kind of cool about UI text views is that they're initially editable. Well, it's not really that cool. Like I think when you're debugging, a lot of the time you'll realize, oh, my text view is like editable. I got to make it ineditable. So you end up having to change is editable to be false. And yeah, but there are times when you would want people to edit it, maybe for some kind of input. Maybe you're asking like the user to input like their birthday or something. That's when your UI text view to be editable. And that's like a little instantiation. And then we have the UI button. So this UI button is pretty cool. It's not like a typical UI button because it actually has an image associated with it, like that little calendar thing. It might be a little tiny, but it's like a little calendar icon. So we basically set the image of that button by calling my button's set image property. So you just do like my button dot set image is equal to like UI image, whatever the name of that like icon is. We don't have to go too much into detail about that. But here are the list of properties. So we have the set title. So with a button, the way you change the text of that button, like say for example here, add to calendar, the way you edit that text is by setting the title. So you would say something like my button dot set title is the string add to calendar for dot normal. And what that dot normal state basically means is just like in any state, like where the button is like there, it will always have that text in the normal state. Um, that basically like anytime you add a button, you're basically gonna be writing dot normal. So we don't have to worry too much about the syntax there. And another thing I wanted to add here is that in order for a button to do something, like typically we want a button to execute some function, right? Whether it's like going to a new screen or changing the color of like the view, we would add a target in this case, which would be in this case, the target function is like this my function. So I don't have my function defined right now anywhere here, but my function would be like some function that you define outside of your code. Like, I don't know, it could just be like my function equal to like background color, like change background color to red. So then I attach that function to this button by writing all this code. And what this is basically saying is like to this button, like to this button itself, I want to make sure that when I press it, it executes this function, my function. And what the dot touch up inside thing is basically saying is that like the function only runs or is executed whenever you stop letting go of that button. So if you guys want a real example, if you go to like the clock app or something and you go to like world clock and you press like the plus button at the top right, like it doesn't actually do something until you let go of that plus button. So you like lift your finger up in order to execute that function. And that's what the dot touch up inside is. And that's like standard across most buttons that you add. You want the function to execute as soon as you let go of the button, not as soon as you tap it. And yeah. Any questions?
So what's the default behavior for a button?
Yeah, so the default behavior, it should the thing is like a button like in order for you to have it execute something, you have to define like what the for is. Like it either has to be dot touch up inside or dot touch up outside, I think.
Yeah. So specifically, those are called why something events. There's touch up inside, touch up outside, ditto inside, ditto outside. Like a whole lot of things to do. The most common one, touch up inside, did like did drag or something like that. But the whole idea is that say I have this blank space, right? I want to not only do something when I click on it, but I also want to do something when you're kind of tap on it multiple times, right? That's where you would add, multiple targets based on the events. And that's you asked about the default behavior. If you don't add a target, it's like it does nothing, right? It's kind of the same as the
Yeah. Thank you. But yeah, that's how you set up a button. Any other questions? We good? Nice. So yeah. Next, last but not least, we have our UI image view. If you couldn't tell, there's not that many important properties that come with the UI image view. For the most part, it's just like setting up the image. So you could set that image to be like some UI image named something. I was mentioning this earlier when I was talking about changing the image of a button. So the way you would change an image of a button or a UI image in this case, like the backdrop, would be something like my image view that image is equal to UI image named this image. And that named part basically corresponds to what that image is named within your assets folder. So in every iOS app, you'll have an assets folder, which basically holds all like the images or any of the external things that you want to include in your app, like icons, images, and like whatever your image is named, like that's just what you put in the named part. So it could really be anything. It's just dependent on what you name your image, but that's how you set up the image. And that's basically all there is to, well, not all there is, but the most basic features of UIKit. Any questions? Any of that before we move on? Yeah.
You need to like import UIKit or is it just standard?
No, yeah, you gotta import. Oh, actually, I think when you start a project, the import statement will already be there, but you have to have that import statement there. If you don't have it, then you literally can't. It's almost like you can't type anything. It's kind of funny. Like you'll have like 10,000 lines of, like read if you just have that one line like commented out.
Did you already say like
Oh, no, but it's just like import UI kit. Yeah. But yeah. Any other questions? You good? Y'all are great at this. Okay. So now moving on to auto layout. So we answered the question, how do we create these objects in code and like what kind of properties do these objects have? But now how do we think about actually putting them onto the screen? So yeah. So auto layout helps us position things relative to each other, relative to things in our view. And every view is defined by like some set of anchors is what we call them. And we want to really stress the word relative because when we're thinking about app development, we're thinking of where we put things with respect to other things. And we'll go more into depth with that later. So these are the anchors that a lot of objects have, or all objects have. All objects have a width and height anchor, which is basically like the property that they have. So you could do like UI button dot width anchor, UI button dot height anchor, and that's how you access these anchors and how you constrain them later. But we have like a width anchor, height anchor, center X anchor, center Y anchor, top anchor, bottom anchor, leading anchor, trailing anchor. This kind of stuff, we'll go more into depth with it in the later slides. So let's go with that right now. So this is what an actual anchor setup looks like for like a UI button or any UI object. So the top anchor is going to be at the top of whatever that object is. In this case, like right there. Then we have a height anchor, which defines like the height of that button. Then we also have the leading anchor, which defines the left part of the button in this case. And then a trailing anchor, which defines the right side of the button. And we have the center X anchor and center Y anchor, which the center X anchor corresponds to like the center of like the X axis on the button. And then the center Y anchor corresponds to like the center of like the Y axis for that button. And we also have a width anchor. Most of the time though, when we're constraining things, we're only going to be doing them like we're only going to be constraining 4 things. And that's either going to be like the height anchor, width anchor, center X anchor, and center Y anchor. Or it could be like top anchor, leading anchor, trailing anchor, and then like height anchor. But most of the time it's going to be like 3 or 4 constraints, lines of constraints you're going to have. And also like an aside about like why we have like leading anchor and like trailing anchor instead of like left anchor or right anchor. Because we're like, because Apple is very inclusive, they decide or they have this property leading anchor because a lot of languages may have different forms of reading. So in the English language, it's always the fact that you read from left to right. And so the leading anchor in this case would be left and the trailing anchor would be right. But if we were to try to make apps in another language that don't read from left to right, but read from right to left instead, then the trailing anchor and leading anchor would have to switch because we want our leading anchor to be like over there and then our trailing anchor to be this way. So it changes depending on like what language you might be writing in and other constraints. But that's the main idea of like why we use leading anchor and trailing anchor instead of left or right anchor. And every view that comes, every view that we have in our app also has like all these kinds of anchors. So in this view, we have like the leading anchor, which is like the leftmost side of the screen, and then the trailing anchor, which is the rightmost side of the screen, and the top anchor, which is like the very top of the screen, and the bottom anchor, which is the very bottom. And that's basically the view controller's root view. So like I said, there are subclasses of UI views, and in this case, our root view is a subclass of a UI view. So it has all these properties like the top anchor, bottom anchor, left anchor, right anchor. And yeah. These are some of the UI objects that we have in our app. So we have like a UI image view, UI label, a UI button, just so you could see like how these examples really work in this kind of app. Yeah, any questions so far? Cool. So I know these are like a lot of phrases that we're kind of throwing at you, like top anchor, bottom anchor. How do we actually use that stuff? We'll go more into that with that in the later slides, but trust it's not going to come naturally that you're going to like remember all these words like by heart. Um, we're lucky that we have like autocomplete in app development, so we don't actually have to memorize these terms at all. But yeah, so yeah, these are the kind of constraints that we want to have between these kinds of objects. So, for example, we want our September UI label to be some amount of pixels below the top of below the bottom anchor of the like the view, the super view. So if we could guesstimate, September is probably like maybe 50 pixels below the top view, below like the very top of the super view. And then from there we constrain everything else. So it's almost like we constrain things from the top going down to the bottom. So after we have our September UI label, we constrain our UI image view, maybe like 100 pixels or so below that label. And then below that image view, we constrain like the humble beginnings text to be like about 50 pixels below as well. And like I said, we basically like constrain things from the top going down to the bottom. That's how we tend to do things around here. And I didn't mention it, but we also have some constraints like probably on the leading and trailing anchor of like the UI image. So we could probably say it's like an offset of like 10 pixels from the side to give it that nice little border. And then we constrain everything else below it to follow those constraints like from the leading and trailing anchor. So we set the humble beginnings leading anchor to be equal to the UI image views leading anchor. But there are some other cases that we want to think about when we're talking about like constraining things. So in the previous example, actually, yeah, okay. So there are these like top anchors and bottom anchors that come with every view, but sometimes they're kind of inconvenient. So like the top anchor, as you can see, is like kind of above the notch that's like right there, but like on the actual like physical phone. And that's kind of annoying to work with because what if we accidentally put a button like at the top anchor in the center, like in the center X spot? Then it'll probably be covered by that notch, which is something that we don't want. So instead, we have this thing called safe area layout guide, which will ensure if you constrain it to this, it will ensure that that button isn't behind the notch. And same thing goes for the bottom anchor. We don't really want to use the bottom anchor because if we put a button all the way at the bottom of the page, then it might interfere with like how you access the home screen and all that, and it'll just be weird. So instead, when we constrain things to the bottom anchor, we do it by referencing safe area layout guide.bottom anchor. And so this is like the green is like the how far the constraints are from the actual bottom anchor and stuff. So our apps look a lot nicer when we use safe area layout guide. And yeah. So this is a little bit about the constraint. Yeah, sure.
So another good thing about safe area layout guide, you can be like, why can't I just do like -10 or like -20, right? Because like, in fact, I can do even more, right? If I want to do like further away from the top, I can put whatever value I want, right? And I mean, sure you can, right? But the whole point of kind of using the framework is that they provide a lot of convenience for you. So I guess like a really specific example is, as you may or may not know, the new iPhone 14 Pro has this thing called the dynamic island, right? Really cool. But the idea, what that means is that up top, that little notch changes in size, right? So if you as the programmer decide to kind of just constrain everything based on how you feel in terms of magic numbers, well then good luck, right? You have to change all your apps for the new iPhone, right? And so the idea is that, also in terms of, as Elvis mentioned just now, why we're using constraints relative to other views, is that we want to try to minimize the amount of magic numbers we have, right? Like, sure, we're still kind of setting things based on like pixels, but the whole idea of having views be constrained based on other views is that, say I have an iPhone 14 Pro Max, you go a really, really, really big one, right? And you compare that to like iPhone S, which is a lot smaller, right? What you see on the phone should remain largely the same because the idea is that the views are constrained based on other views, right? So that's the whole idea of why we have these constraints, as well as why we want to be using kind of these frameworks for the constraints.
Yeah. And with constraining things, there comes the direction. So maybe we don't want to constrain a button like at the very like top of the view. So we want to have some kind of offset. So this is how you would follow that kind of offset. It's a little weird. So I mean the positive X goes this way. I mean, if you're not familiar with programming, it'll be a little weird. So the positive X goes like in this direction, which is normal, but then positive Y goes down. I remember when I first learned about this, I was like, yo, like what the heck? Like, why is this? And this isn't even just for like iOS apps. Like this is across like any kind of like front end development, like for web apps, like Y is like always down. And I was talking to this with a previous iOS member actually like a couple minutes before lecture, and apparently it has something to do with like cathode rays. I guess that's just like a standard that was set. Kind of sucks, but we're stuck with it. So positive Y is always down. Just gotta remember that. Yeah. So in this case, I guess this is a question for y'all. How do you think we would constrain this view two, if we have a view two, to be a 20 pixels below view one? If we're talking with respect to like view two's like top anchor, view two's bottom anchor, maybe, or view one's like bottom anchor and view two's top anchor. So how would we like kind of constrain this? Do you guys have any idea? Okay, we'll go on a little bit. But basically the way you constrain it is you access view two's top anchor. And then you do like dot constraint. So what this is basically saying is I'm gonna take U2's top anchor and I'm gonna constrain it to be equal to something. And the constant part is the offset. So maybe it's like 20 pixels down, maybe it's like 100 pixels down. In this case, constant's gonna be 20. And we take view two's top anchor and we constrain it to view one's bottom anchor. So if we just left it at that and didn't have a constant, view two would be like directly below view one without any offset. So they'd be like touching because we're constraining view two's top anchor to be attached to the view one's bottom anchor. But because we have the constant, which is going to be 20, it's going to be 20 below. And that's the idea. This is like the syntax for constraining things, such as this. And moving on to another example, we have view one, and we have the safe area layout guide, that's top anchor. How do we constrain the view one to be 20 pixels below the top anchor for safe area layout guide? So almost identical to the previous example. We would constrain it by accessing view one's top anchor and setting it equal to the safe area layout guide's top anchor with a constant of 20 below. So we set it to be 20 below the very top. And that's the offset that we have. Any questions so far? Doing well. Cool. So that's the idea of like constraining things.